Welcome to 221B Stories, where every story invites you into a world of secrets and surprises. Grab your coffee, stay curious, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let's get started. Sherlock Holmes and the Whispering Killer. Chapter 1 London's. Fog had a peculiar quality that evening, thick as a banker's purse, and just as impenetrable. Gas lamps flickered in vain against the damp shroud that curled around Baker Street, muting the city's usual clamour into a distant murmur. It was a night that made the world feel smaller, pressing the unknown just beyond reach, hiding truths in the smog. I had been enjoying a rare moment of quiet in our lodgings at 221B Baker Street, perusing the day's edition of the Times, when Holmes, who had been gazing out the window, pipe in hand, spoke abruptly. "Watson, do you believe a man can be murdered twice?" I lowered my newspaper and studied him. Holmes's expression was unreadable, his gaze fixed upon something unseen. "Twice?" I repeated. "A man can certainly be declared dead in error and later meet his fate, but I gather that is not what you mean." Holmes turned, his sharp features illuminated by the orange glow of the hearth. "Not in the way you imagine. Consider this. What if a man was not only killed but erased? Not merely dead, but struck from memory, from records, from existence itself." I set the paper aside. "You are being uncharacteristically cryptic, Holmes." A rare smile touched his lips. "Then allow me to be precise. Inspector Lestrade will be here shortly, bringing a case unlike any we have encountered. The Scotland Yard report details the murder of a man named Elias Finchley. A case remarkable not for its brutality, but for its impossibility." The name meant nothing to me. "Impossible how?" Holmes's fingers drummed against his chair. "Because, my dear Watson, as of this morning, Elias Finchley does not exist." At that precise moment, a firm knock rattled the door, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in a damp and harried-looking Inspector Lestrade. His coat dripped with rain, his brow furrowed with frustration. "Holmes," Lestrade began, tossing his hat onto a nearby chair, "I have half a mind to believe I'm going mad, and the other half to wonder if you already have." Holmes gestured for him to continue. Lestrade exhaled sharply. "Last night, a man named Elias Finchley was found dead in his home, stabbed through the heart. He lived in a modest flat on Rosebery Lane, and the constables arrived within minutes of a neighbour reporting a struggle. Body still warm, blood still fresh, clear case of murder." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And yet," Lestrade's jaw tightened, "and yet this morning all records of him were gone. The landlord swore he never rented to any such man. No birth certificate, no employment records, no family. The very neighbour who reported the crime now claims she saw nothing, knows nothing. Even his corpse is missing." I straightened in my chair. "Missing?" Lestrade nodded grimly. "Disappeared from the mortuary. And before you ask, no one saw anything. Not a doctor, not a constable, not even the clerk who wrote the report." Holmes's eyes gleamed with intrigue. "And yet you remember? That's the damned part of it, Holmes. I do. I was there. I saw the body. I took statements. Lestrade hesitated, running a hand through his damp hair. "I even had Finchley's name written in my notebook. But when I checked it this morning, The page was blank. A chill crawled up my spine. Holmes, however, leaned forward, more engaged than ever. "Tell me, Lestrade," he murmured, "did Finchley live alone?" Lestrade hesitated. I thought so, but now I'm not certain." Holmes's smile widened. "Excellent. Then we must begin at once. Watson, fetch your coat. It appears we have a crime that has yet to exist. Bonjour. Moving to the next chapter, let us know where you are watching from. And if you love stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another incredible story waiting for you." Chapter 32, Rosebery Lane, was a quiet street, nestled in the heart of London, yet seemingly untouched by its usual clamour. A place of respectable townhouses and dimly lit corridors, where secrets settled like dust in the corners of forgotten rooms. The rain had ceased, leaving the cobblestones slick and glistening beneath the gas lamps. As our cab halted before number 16, a sense of unease prickled at my skin. The house loomed in the damp night air, tall, narrow, and unremarkable in every way. Yet, as I stepped onto the pavement, an odd sensation gripped me. It was as if my mind struggled to hold onto the shape of it, as if the house flickered in and out of thought the moment I looked away. I turned to Holmes, who was watching me with sharp amusement. "You feel it, don't you, Watson?" I hesitated. "Feel what?" "That peculiar resistance. A trick of the mind, as though you must actively remember that the house exists, lest it slip from your thoughts." I opened my mouth to object, but found that I did feel precisely that. It was unlike anything I had experienced before. I could describe the house if I focused, but the moment I let my mind wander, even for an instant, it became difficult to recall the details of its facade. Holmes's expression darkened slightly. "That, my dear Watson, is the first sign we are dealing with something beyond the ordinary." Lestrade, who had been a step ahead of us, turned back with a scoff. "It's just a house, Holmes. You're letting that overactive brain of yours play tricks." He reached for the doorknob and twisted, locked. With a muttered curse, he rapped on the wood. The sound was dull, as though the house itself resisted being disturbed. Holmes stepped forward, producing his thin metal lockpick from his coat. With practised efficiency, he slid the instrument into the keyhole and worked in silence. The lock gave with a reluctant click. The door creaked open, a scent of damp wood and something older, something musty, almost like decay, wafted toward us. I stepped inside after Holmes, my boots tapping against the wooden floorboards. The air was stale, the kind that belongs to places left untouched for years. Lestrade's brow furrowed. "That's odd." "What is?" I asked. Holmes answered instead. "A house in active use should not smell as though it has been abandoned." He turned his keen gaze around the dimly lit interior. "Lestrade, you are certain Finchley lived here?" Lestrade's mouth opened, but his response came hesitantly. I was certain." He shook his head as if shaking off a sudden wave of doubt. "The neighbours knew him. The landlord collected rent. There was furniture here, evidence of someone's presence. But now," I followed his gaze, "the house was empty, not ransacked, not looted, simply bare, as if no one had ever lived there at all." Holmes moved forward, his steps measured, his eyes sharp as he took in the details, or rather, the absence of them. A fireplace devoid of soot, windows without curtains, no furniture, no personal effects, no trace that Elias Finchley or anyone had ever occupied this place. Yet a fine layer of dust settled in places it should not have. A small depression in the wood near the fireplace suggested where a chair might have once rested. The faintest indentations in the floor hinted at furniture that was no longer present. "Curious," Holmes murmured. "Holmes," I said slowly, my unease growing. "If this house was emptied overnight, surely someone would have noticed." "One would think so," he agreed, "and yet here we stand, surrounded by the suggestion of a residence that no longer exists." Lestrade swore under his breath. "This is madness. If I didn't know better, I'd say—" He stopped himself. Holmes arched an eyebrow. "Go on." Lestrade hesitated. Then, gruffly, he said, "I'd say it's as if someone wiped this place clean from history." Holmes smiled, though there was no humour in it. "Then, Inspector, it appears we are dealing with something quite deliberate." I swallowed, glancing around at the empty space. A creeping sensation had settled into my chest, a feeling that we should not be here, that we were prying into something that resisted being known. Holmes, undeterred, walked deeper into the house, his keen eyes searching for anomalies. He ran a gloved hand along the edge of the fireplace, lifting it to reveal a trace of fine white dust. He rubbed it between his fingers. "Plaster," he murmured. "A wall has been altered." I frowned. A hidden compartment, or something removed. His gaze flicked to the floor, where faint scratches near the baseboard suggested that something had once stood there. A bookshelf, perhaps. Holmes took a slow breath. "Watson, tell me, what do you hear?" I hesitated, straining my ears. The house was silent, oppressively so. No distant carriages, no footsteps outside, not even the creak of settling wood. "Nothing," I murmured. Holmes nodded. "Precisely. This house is too quiet." A new chill ran through me. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "What are you saying, Holmes?" Holmes turned, his face unreadable. "I am saying, Inspector, that this house, like its owner, was not meant to be found." At that moment, a noise shattered the silence, a whisper. Not from behind us, not from above or below. It came from everywhere. A soft, sighing breath, like the exhalation of something ancient. Then the lamps flickered, just for a moment, and the house fell silent once more. Holmes exhaled slowly. Then, as if nothing had happened, he adjusted his coat. "Fascinating." Lestrade took a cautious step back. "I don't like this, Holmes." "Nor should you." Holmes glanced at me, and for the first time in our long acquaintance, I saw something strange in his gaze. Not fear, no, but an intense analytical focus, as though he were grasping at something just beyond comprehension. His voice was quiet when he spoke next. "Watson, Lestrade, I believe we are dealing with something that does not wish to be remembered." Chapter 3. We left the house on Rosebery Lane with a sense of unease clinging to us like the damp fog that curled through the streets of London. The silence in that house had been unnatural. The whisper we had heard, unaccounted for. Holmes, ever the man of logic, had not yet offered an explanation, but I could see it working through his mind, piece by piece, like an unseen mechanism, clicking into place. Lestrade had grown uncharacteristically quiet as well, though whether from unease or sheer frustration, I could not tell. We walked the cobbled streets in silence until we reached a cab, where Holmes, in his usual decisive manner, rapped twice on the carriage frame and gave the address of a modest pub near Fleet Street. Lestrade scowled. "And what, pray tell, is at the Black Swan?" "A man who may not exist," Holmes said simply. I frowned. "You mean Finchley?" Holmes shook his head. "No, but if Finchley has been erased, then surely someone must have done the erasing, and I suspect we may find a whisper of them at our next stop." Lestrade muttered something under his breath, but climbed in regardless. The cab rocked forward, carrying us through the fog-strewn streets of London, the city half drowned in mist and moonlight. The Black Swan was not an establishment of high regard. It was the sort of place where men kept their backs to the walls, and their voices low, where secrets traded hands as easily as coin. The air smelled of tobacco, sweat, and old ale, and the dim glow of lanterns cast flickering shadows against the wooden walls. Holmes strode in without hesitation, his sharp gaze sweeping the room. I followed closely, my coat drawn tight against the damp air, while Lestrade took his usual position a step behind, watchful, uneasy. A handful of patrons occupied the space, most hunched over their drinks, their faces obscured by shadow. Holmes, however, ignored them and walked straight to the bar. He placed a single sovereign on the counter and slid it toward the barkeep, a burly man with a weathered face and a cautious eye. Holmes spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Woo, seek a man who speaks in whispers." The bartender's gaze flickered toward Holmes, then to the coin. He hesitated only a second before pocketing it and nodding toward the back. "Room in the corner," he muttered. "Don't stay long." Holmes inclined his head in thanks and turned, leading the way. Lestrade and I exchanged a glance before following. The man in the corner was draped in shadow, his features obscured by the dim lighting. He was thin, too thin, his cheekbones sharp, his eyes sunken, as though he had seen too much of something he was never meant to witness. Holmes took a seat opposite him. I did the same, and Lestrade remained standing, his arms folded tightly across his chest. The man tilted his head slightly, as though listening to something we could not hear. Then he spoke, his voice little more than a whisper. "They know you are looking?" Holmes showed no reaction, merely steepling his fingers. "So I would expect. They will erase you too." The man's gaze flicked toward me. Him first. A cold unease twisted in my gut. Holmes remained unreadable. "Tell me about Elias Finchley." The man exhaled slowly, as if Holmes had spoken something he had been dreading to hear. Finchley was a mark, a mistake. He was never meant to be noticed. That is why he is gone. Lestrade scoffed. "Gone? He was murdered." The man's whisper turned sharper. "No, he was corrected." A silence stretched between us. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to look at Holmes, knowing he would already be watching, listening, calculating. Finally, Holmes leaned forward, slightly, his voice even, deliberate. "And who, precisely, is responsible for these corrections?" The man's gaze darted around the room. He licked his lips and whispered something so softly that I almost did not catch it. The Order of the Hollow Hand. Holmes did not react immediately. His fingers tapped once against the tabletop, a small measured movement. Then he spoke, voice level, a name I have not heard in some time. I turned sharply. "Holmes, you know of them?" Holmes's lips quirked at the corner, but there was no amusement in his eyes. Only in whispers, Watson. The man in front of us took a slow, shuddering breath. "You have already gone too far," he murmured. "Leave this be." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "And if I do not?" The man's whisper was barely audible. "Then they will ensure you were never here at all." A sharp clatter interrupted us. Lestrade had drawn his pistol, his patience finally spent. "Enough of this nonsense. Either tell us something useful or—" The man was already rising. Holmes stood as well, his movement fluid, controlled. "Inspector, put that away. We are finished here." Lestrade gave a frustrated grunt, but relented, lowering his firearm. The man turned away, but as he did, he spoke one last time, softly, barely above the hum of the room. "Look to the house that is no longer there." Then he slipped into the darkness and was gone. We stood beneath the gaslight, the fog thick around us. Holmes had been silent since we left, his mind undoubtedly sorting through the pieces of the puzzle. Finally, I spoke. "Holmes, what do you make of it?" He exhaled through his nose. "A puzzle with half its pieces missing, Watson." Lestrade shook his head. "And what in God's name is the Order of the Hollow Hand?" Holmes's gaze was distant, his thoughts moving elsewhere. A name, nothing more. A whisper on the edges of history. I frowned. "And the house that is no longer there?" Holmes turned to me, his expression unreadable. "That, Watson, is precisely what we must find out." The gaslight above us flickered. Once, twice, before steadying. Holmes glanced up at it, his expression cool. Then he turned sharply on his heel and strode forward into the night. We followed. Chapter 4. The night was thick with mist as we strode through the streets, the gas lamps struggling against the consuming fog. The words of the whispering man at the Black Swan lingered in my mind. "Look to the house that is no longer there." A phrase that was, at once, both nonsense and deeply unsettling. Holmes walked briskly ahead, his coat billowing behind him like a shadow in motion. Lestrade and I followed, his boots striking the cobblestones with a determination that bordered on frustration. "I'll say it plain, Holmes," Lestrade muttered, adjusting his coat. "This is lunacy. A house doesn't just vanish." Holmes, without breaking stride, replied, "And yet Finchley's house was stripped of its very presence, not merely emptied, but erased." Lestrade shook his head. "So what? Now we chase ghosts!" "Not ghosts, Lestrade." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Something far more deliberate." By the time we arrived at Burlington Place, the streets had emptied, leaving only the distant rattle of a carriage wheel and the occasional echo of footsteps disappearing into the fog. The houses here were stately, uniform in their grandeur. But when we reached the place Holmes was leading us to, number 43, I stopped cold. There was nothing there. I do not mean the house had been destroyed or abandoned. I mean that it did not exist at all. Between number 41 and number 45, there was only a narrow alleyway, as if number 43 had never been built. No ruins, no debris, no foundation, only an empty gap that my mind refused to acknowledge at first glance. It was as though I had to force my thoughts around the impossibility of it. Lestrade's face twisted into a scowl. "Now, wait just a moment. Holmes, what the devil—" Holmes had already stepped forward, eyes sharp, examining the alleyway, as one would examine a crime scene. He crouched, brushing his fingers against the ground. When he rose, he held up his fingertips. "Dust," he murmured. I frowned. "Dust? A place that has never been disturbed should not collect dust. Watson!" Holmes stepped forward again, gaze calculating. "And yet there are marks here, imprints in the stone, faint as a breath." Lestrade, arms crossed, peered into the alley. "I see nothing." "You are not looking," Holmes murmured. Then he pulled a matchbox from his pocket, struck a flame, and let the light flicker towards the empty space. The flame wavered as if caught in a breeze, but there was no wind. Lestrade took an involuntary step back. "What the hell is this?" Holmes smiled faintly. "A house, Inspector. A house that does not wish to be seen." A chill crawled down my spine. "Then how do we find it?" I asked. Holmes exhaled, his breath visible in the night air. "By Jove, refusing to forget." He took another step toward the empty alley, his hand brushing against the cold brick of number 41, then reaching into the gap, into what should have been a solid wall. And then his fingers vanished, not into darkness, not into shadow, but into nothingness. I inhaled sharply, stepping forward, but Holmes withdrew his hand before I could react. His expression remained unreadable, yet I saw the flicker of something rare in his eyes. Or Lestrade's face was pale. "Holmes, what the hell was that?" "A doorway," Holmes said simply. "A threshold between what is seen and what is meant to be forgotten." Lestrade swore. "You're telling me—" "I am telling you nothing, Lestrade," Holmes cut in, adjusting his gloves. "I am merely observing what is." He turned to me. "Watson, if you please." I hesitated. "You want me to—" "Touch the wall." I swallowed, glancing at the empty space between the buildings. The very air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, but I trusted Holmes. I stepped forward, reached out, and, for a moment, my mind rebelled. I should have touched brick, but instead my fingers brushed against cold air, a surface that was there and not there at the same time. Then, abruptly, the sensation changed. I was touching wood. A door, my heart pounded. I jerked my hand away. The second I did, the presence of the door vanished from my perception. I gasped, "Holmes, what in God's name?" Holmes was already moving. "Lestrade, Watson, stay close," and before I could say another word, he stepped forward, disappearing into the empty space. For a single horrifying second, he was gone. Then his voice, from nowhere. "Watson, Lestrade, it is here." Lestrade shot me a wild look. "I am not walking into thin air, Watson." And yet, despite the raw terror clawing at my gut, I knew there was only one thing to do. I stepped forward, and in that instant, the world changed. Chapter 5. For the briefest moment, stepping forward into the void, I felt as though I had plunged into icy water. My lungs tightened, my senses dulled. The city, the gas lamps, Lestrade's muttered protests, all of it blinked away. Then, just as suddenly, I was somewhere else. The air was thick, weighted with a strange silence. I could hear my own breathing, ragged, uneasy, but no sound from the world beyond. The very space around me felt compressed, as if I had stepped through an invisible veil, separating reality from something older, something meant to be unseen. Holmes stood just ahead, his sharp gaze flicking around as though cataloguing details invisible to me. I turned, expecting to see the alleyway behind us, but nothing. No entrance, no exit. Just a dim corridor stretching ahead, lined with wood-panelled walls that should not exist. A sharp oath tore through the silence, and Lestrade staggered in behind me. He stumbled forward, his hand against the wall, as though steadying himself after a dizzying fall. "Bloody!" He exhaled hard, his breath misting in the cold. "That is the last time I follow you into nothingness, Holmes." Holmes did not acknowledge him. His fingers traced the panelling, eyes narrowing. "Watson," murmured. I swallowed, my voice hoarse. "Yes," he pointed. "Tell me what you see." I turned and felt my stomach drop. The corridor stretched forward farther than it should. I could see no doors, no windows. The flickering glow of unseen gas lamps provided just enough light to suggest a path forward, yet no fixtures were visible. It was as though the space itself invented light where needed, and then I saw it, a single painting hanging on the wall. It was wrong. The frame was an intricate curling silver, impossibly delicate, as though spun from thin wire rather than cast metal. But it was the portrait within that made my breath catch. A man, dressed in early Victorian fashion, sat upright in an ornate chair. His face was thin, almost gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and dark, deep-set eyes that seemed to follow me even as I moved. There was no nameplate, no indication of who he was, and yet I recognized him. I did not know how or why, but something about the image burned in my mind like a memory just beyond reach. Holmes observed me keenly. "You feel it, don't you?" I licked my lips, my throat dry. I know this man." Lestrade turned sharply. "You do?" "Yes." I stepped closer, drawn forward despite myself. And then I noticed it. His hand, the man's right hand, was held up in a peculiar gesture, his fingers slightly curled, as if he were miming a grasp that was just out of reach. And upon closer inspection, the fingers were blurred, not by paint, nor age, nor wear, but by something else, as if the world itself refused to remember what he held. Holmes nodded slightly. "Interesting?" Lestrade grunted. "Interesting? That's your word for it." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't like this, Holmes. Not one bit. Nor should you," Holmes murmured. "This place was not meant to be found." I turned back to him. "What is this place?" Holmes's gaze flicked to the corridor ahead. A liminal space. A threshold between what was and what is meant to be forgotten. Lestrade let out a short, humorless laugh. "Brilliant! Any ideas on how to get out?" Holmes exhaled through his nose. "Forward!" Lestrade groaned. "Of course." With that, Holmes strode ahead, his steps confident. I followed, feeling as if each step took me further from the world I had known. The corridor ended at a single unmarked door. Holmes did not hesitate. He placed his gloved hand on the handle and turned. A faint click, the door swung open, revealing a darkened chamber beyond. We stepped inside, and the whispering began. At first, I thought it was the wind. A soft sigh curling through the still air. But no, this was something else. Voices, soft, unintelligible, layered atop one another. They did not speak in any language I recognized. They hummed low and melodic, reverberating through the walls, the floor, the very air. Lestrade swore under his breath. Holmes! Holmes stepped forward, his gaze flickering toward the center of the room. A desk, old, dark wood, and upon it a single ledger. Holmes approached without hesitation. He lifted the book, its binding brittle, the pages crackling with age. His gloved fingers flipped to the first entry. There was only one name written within. Holmes read aloud, Elias Finchley. I felt a sudden pressure in my skull, as though my very mind were resisting the name itself. Lestrade cursed, rubbing his temples. This isn't. Holmes's fingers traced the inked letters. This book is a record of those erased. I took an uneasy step forward. But why? Holmes turned the page. His voice remained cool. Because, Watson, this is where history is rewritten. I felt the whispering grow louder. The voices layered upon one another, urgent, insistent. Holmes closed the book. The whispers ceased. For a moment, the room was deathly silent. Then softly, Holmes murmured almost to himself, "The hollow hand erases. But what do they fear being remembered?" I had no answer, but I knew without question we were being watched. Holmes turned to us, his expression unreadable. "We need to leave." I exhaled, tension coiling in my gut. "And how exactly do we do that, Holmes?" He glanced once more at the ledger, then at the door behind us. His answer was quiet. "We retrace our steps. Before they erase us too. I did not need to be told twice." Lestrade reached for the door, and the whispering began again. But this time, it spoke our names. Chapter 6. The whispering voices swirled around us, curling through the dimly lit chamber like a presence unseen. They did not scream or wail. No, they were calm, deliberate, as though reciting something only they could understand. And yet I heard it, my name. Lestrade heard his too. He stiffened, his hand clenching around the hilt of his revolver. "Holmes," he muttered. "What the hell is this?" Holmes, ever composed, did not answer immediately. He simply turned back to the ledger, fingers skimming over the brittle pages. His eyes flicked over each name, his expression unreadable. But I saw it, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the quick inhale through his nose. Holmes was rarely surprised. And yet, whatever he had found on that page had given him pause. I stepped closer. "Holmes?" Slowly, he turned the book toward me. There, in faded ink, were 3 names written beneath Elias Finchley's: Sherlock Holmes, Dr. John Watson, Inspector G. Lestrade. A chill settled over me, deeper than anything I had felt. Before Lestrade swore, "That's not possible." Holmes exhaled. his gaze still fixed on the ledger. "On the contrary, Lestrade, it is entirely possible." He turned a page, then another, all blank, then back to our names, as if proving they had always been there. Juntian's voice was quiet when he spoke next. "We were never meant to leave this place." A sickening weight pressed against my chest. My mouth had gone dry, but I forced myself to speak. "Oh, Holmes, if this book records those who have been erased, then someone has already decided our fate," he finished for me. The whispering grew louder. The voices layered atop one another, speaking a language I could not understand. Yet I felt its meaning. We were not meant to remember, and if we did, we would be forgotten too. Holmes snapped the book shut. Instantly the voices ceased. Lestrade ran a hand through his hair, his breathing unsteady. "Tell me you have a way out of this, Holmes." Holmes straightened, slipping the ledger under his arm. "I intend to." I blinked. "You're taking it?" "Of course. It is the only record of those they have erased. If we are to survive this, Watson, we must ensure we are remembered." I shuddered. "By whom?" Holmes's gaze flicked toward the door. "That, my dear Watson, is the question." We retraced our steps, or at least we tried. But the hallway was no longer the same. Where there had once been a single portrait, now there were 3. And each of them bore our faces. Lestrade cursed, stepping back. "Holmes, tell me that isn't what I think it is." Holmes tilted his head, studying the paintings with a cool, detached expression. "It would seem," he said lightly, "that someone has already begun our erasure." I swallowed hard. The paintings were flawless, impossibly detailed. Every line, every shadow, they were us. Except I stepped closer, my stomach knotting. There was something wrong with my portrait. My eyes, they were empty. Not painted over, not obscured, simply hollow. As though the artist had forgotten to give me sight. Lestrade's jaw clenched. "Holmes, if we don't leave now, I swear to God." "I quite agree, Lestrade." Holmes turned sharply. "This way." He strode forward, not waiting for hesitation. I followed, my pulse pounding against my ribs. The weight of the ledger in Holmes's arms felt heavier than mere paper. Behind us, the whispering resumed, faster, urgent, dared not look back. We reached the end of the hall, a door now standing where none had been before. Holmes did not hesitate. He grasped the handle and twisted. Nothing. It did not budge. Lestrade stepped forward, shouldering past me. "Out of the way!" He kicked at the door, once, twice, but it held firm. Holmes's fingers tightened around the ledger. "They do not want us to leave. Fantastic!" Lestrade turned, his expression dark. "Then tell me, genius, how do we get out?" Holmes exhaled, then reached into his coat, withdrawing a small vial. The pale liquid inside swirled in the dim light. I recognized it at once. Holmes! Before I could protest, he uncorked the bottle and flung the liquid at the door. The moment it touched wood, the door shuddered. A low groaning sound rumbled through the corridor. Something ancient, protesting. The whispering turned to screaming. Holmes stepped back, adjusting his cuffs. "Alkaline solution," he explained. "Strong enough to reveal hidden engravings. Or, in this case, a threshold that does not wish to be seen." Lestrade gaped. "That was your plan?" Humperdinck smiled, "And it appears to have worked." The door creaked, and then it swung open. Beyond it, the fog-laden streets of London awaited. Holmes turned to us. "Move, now!" We did not need to be told twice. Lestrade was first through, nearly stumbling onto the pavement. I followed, my breath hitching as the cold night air wrapped around me once more. Holmes was the last to step through. The moment his feet hit solid ground, the door slammed shut behind him. I turned sharply, expecting to see the alley, the corridor, the impossible house. But there was nothing, just the empty space between number 41 and number 45, as though the house had never been there at all. For several moments none of us spoke. Lestrade's hands were on his knees, his breathing ragged. He swallowed, shaking his head. "I don't want to know." Holmes dusted off his coat. "Then don't ask." I stared at the empty space where the door had been. My thoughts reeled, my mind grasping at the last moments in that corridor. The portraits, the ledger, the whispering voices. "Holmes!" My voice was hoarse. "What just happened?" Holmes glanced at me, his sharp gaze unreadable. "We trespassed upon something, Watson. Something that does not wish to be known." I shivered. "And the ledger?" Holmes glanced down at the book in his hands. Then, without hesitation, he tore out the page with our names. Lestrade's eyes widened. "You're destroying it?" "No." Holmes slipped the torn page into his pocket. "I am keeping a reminder." He turned back to the empty alley. His expression for the first time that night was grave. This is not over, and though I could not explain why, I knew with a terrible certainty he was right. Chapter 7. The walk back to 2221B Baker Street was quiet. The usual rattle of carriage wheels, the distant hum of London's nightlife, none of it seemed real after what we had just endured. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on my chest, a suffocating awareness that we had stepped beyond the ordinary limits of deduction and into something altogether more unnatural. Lestrade had barely spoken since we left the alley. He had remained stiff beside me, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, his mouth a thin, pale line. It was not often that Scotland Yard's finest found himself shaken. Tonight, however, he looked like a man who had glimpsed something he wished he hadn't. Holmes, by contrast, was unusually quiet. Not in the contemplative manner I was accustomed to, when his mind was weaving deductions at a pace no man could match, but in a way that unsettled me. He was thinking, but he was also troubled. As we turned onto Baker Street, I could hold my tongue no longer. "Holmes," I murmured, "tell me the truth. What did we just escape from?" He did not answer immediately. We reached the doorstep of 221B, and Mrs. Hudson, always a keen observer, took one look at us and said nothing. She merely gave us a small knowing nod before retreating back inside. Once we were in the warmth of our sitting room, Holmes finally spoke. "It was not an escape, Watson," he said, setting the ledger down on the table. "Not entirely." Lestrade, still standing, let out a bitter laugh. "That's rich, because from where I'm standing, we barely got out of that place with our skins intact." Holmes did not disagree. He poured himself a measure of brandy, his fingers uncharacteristically tense around the glass before he took a slow sip. I sat across from him. You knew about the Order of the Hollow Hand, didn't you? Holmes exhaled sharply, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. I had heard rumours, whispers among certain circles, but nothing concrete, nothing I could prove. Lestrade dropped heavily into a chair. And what are they, Holmes? Some sort of... He hesitated, searching for the right words. A secret society. Holmes's expression darkened. Worse? Lestrade scoffed. Worse than that nonsense. You expect me to believe that? Holmes placed his glass down. Tell me, Inspector, do you recall the first case we ever solved? Together? Lestrade frowned. Of course I do. Holmes studied him closely. Are you certain? Lestrade blinked. His brow furrowed. His lips parted, then paused. A flicker of something crossed his face, something I had never seen before. He looked lost. He closed his mouth, inhaled, then shook his head. That's ridiculous. I know we've worked together for years. He gestured toward me. Watson's written them all down, hasn't he? Holmes leaned back, steepling, his fingers. Have I, Watson? I opened my mouth instinctively to confirm, then stopped. My breath caught. A terrifying emptiness settled in my stomach. I tried to recall our first case, the first time Holmes and I had worked together, and for the life of me, I couldn't. The memories blurred at the edges, slipping like sand through my fingers. I knew we had solved cases, dozens of them. I remembered details of Scotland Yard, of Baker Street, of the criminals we had unmasked. But that first case, the very beginning, it was gone. My pulse quickened. I rubbed my temples, forcing myself to think, to grasp at something, anything. But the harder I tried to remember, the more it slipped away. Lestrade saw my face pale. Watson? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Holmes nodded once. Now you begin to understand. Lestrade stiffened. No, this is a trick. He turned on Holmes, jabbing a finger at him. You're playing some bloody mind game. Holmes did not move. Would that I were, Lestrade. The inspector pushed to his feet, shaking his head. No, this isn't right. I know what's real. I remember my cases. I remember. His breath hitched. He pressed a hand to his head, as though fighting off some invisible pressure. I could see the panic rising in his eyes. Holmes watched him carefully. If you fight it, it only becomes worse. Lestrade's hands clenched into fists. What the hell is happening to me? Holmes stood, his expression grim. You are remembering what was meant to be forgotten. Lestrade took a shaky step back. He looked between us, then at the ledger sitting on the table. His voice was raw. Did we just sign our own damnation, Holmes? Holmes was silent for a moment. Then softly he replied, No, Lestrade. He exhaled. We were damned the moment we saw the truth. Holmes did not sleep that night, nor did I. I watched him from my chair as he sat in his usual position, the ledger open before him, scanning the pages for something, anything, that might explain our fate. Lestrade had left after an hour of pacing, muttering to himself, refusing to sit still. I could not blame him. Holmes, however, remained composed. Watson, he murmured after some time. I looked up. Yes. He did not look at me. His gaze remained fixed on the ledger. Do you recall how many cases we have solved? Together? Of course, I straightened. 56. At least those I have written. He nodded once. And yet, this book tells me otherwise. A creeping unease coiled in my gut. Holmes lifted a page, turning it carefully. His voice was quiet. 57. I swallowed. That's impossible. Holmes finally met my gaze. His eyes were unreadable. Then tell me, Watson, he murmured. Who was Henry Acton? My mouth went dry. Who? Holmes simply watched me. I did not recognize the name. And yet my chest ached. My hands felt empty. My mind recoiled from the name, as though I had once known it, once written it down, and had since forgotten. Holmes exhaled, setting the ledger aside. The hollow hand erases, Watson. His voice was soft, final, and I fear we have just begun to remember what we have already lost. Chapter 8 Dawn crept into Baker Street with an unnatural hush, as though the world itself hesitated to move forward. The usual clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the murmur of street vendors, the distant clang of industry. These sounds arrived late, sluggish, as if London were waking from a dream it did not wish to remember. He had not slept, neither had Holmes. The ledger sat between us on the table, its brittle pages a testament to the forgotten. Holmes had studied it through the night, his sharp mind dissecting every detail, searching for a flaw in the impossible truth before us. I could not bring myself to open it again. Instead, I turned my focus to the name Holmes had spoken before dawn, the one that had lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. Henry Acton. I could not recall him, and yet his absence left an aching void, as though a crucial puzzle piece had been snatched away before I could see the full picture. Holmes finally broke the silence. Watson. I looked up. He tapped a finger against the ledger. We are missing something. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Holmes, we are missing everything. Our own memories betray us. How can we investigate what we cannot even recall? Holmes leaned back slightly, considering my words. Then quietly, he said, We reconstruct. I frowned. Reconstruct? Holmes nodded. The mind is a remarkable instrument, Watson. It is prone to deception, yes, but also to habit. The order of the hollow hand may erase names, faces, records, but they cannot erase patterns. His fingers drummed against the table. Tell me, how do I approach a case? I sighed. You examine the facts, gather clues, question the logic. Precisely. Holmes's gaze sharpened, and even now, in the absence of memory, my mind insists that there was a case surrounding Henry Acton. That alone is evidence enough. A shadow flickered across my thoughts. But what if we were meant to forget it, Holmes? What if Holmes cut me off? Then the very act of remembering is an act of defiance. I swallowed. He was right. By midday, we had arrived at Scotland Yard, its familiar facade doing little to settle the unease that had crept into my bones. Holmes strode ahead with purpose, his movements brisk, methodical. Lestrade met us at the entrance, dark circles under his eyes, his usual sharp demeanour dulled by the weight of things he could not explain. He led us to his office without a word, shutting the door firmly behind him. "Well?" he said gruffly, arms crossed. "I assume you've come because you're not quite ready to let go of this insanity." Holmes ignored the jab, settling into a chair. "Inspector, we require access to past case files," Lestrade scoffed. "Which ones?" Holmes's lips barely moved. "All of them." Lestrade froze. A long silence stretched between them. I could see the inspector's fingers twitching against his coat, an unconscious tell of deep discomfort. "Holmes!" Lestrade's voice was quieter now, lower, as though afraid of what he might say next. "You don't want to do this." Holmes leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Lestrade's. "I already have, Inspector, and I am asking you, before it is too late, to help me find what has been lost." Lestrade exhaled sharply, then stood and crossed the room to a filing cabinet. I watched as he unlocked it, his hands slower than usual, hesitant as though fighting something unseen. He pulled open a drawer marked H.L. Holmes rose, stepping forward, scanning the names. His gloved fingers ran across the edges of each file. Then he stopped. A space. An empty gap where a file should have been. The label on the folder before the gap read, Hargrove, Edmund. The label on the folder after the gap read, Addison, Leonard Holmes, murmured, "It should be here." Lestrade's hand tightened into a fist. "I told you!" Holmes pulled out the surrounding files, flipping through them with practiced precision. Nothing. No misplacement, no missing page. It was as though the file had never existed. I looked at Lestrade. Who would have access to remove it? Lestrade let out a humorless chuckle. "No one, Watson." His eyes darkened. "And that's the problem." Holmes's expression remained impassive, though I saw the gears turning in his mind. Then he did something strange. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single blank sheet of paper. Without hesitation, he slipped it into the empty space where the missing file should have been. Lestrade frowned. "What are you?" Holmes interrupted. "A test." He closed the cabinet without the missing file, but with the blank page in its place. Then, turning, he said coolly, "We return in 24 hours." Lestrade blinked. "And if nothing happens?" Holmes smirked, adjusting his coat. Then, "We will know we have been outwitted." He turned to leave, his voice trailing behind him. "But if it is gone, Lestrade, then we will know we have been seen." As we left Scotland Yard, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Holmes was unbothered. He moved through the city as he always did, swift, deliberate. But I saw the way his gaze flickered subtly to the shadows. "Are running out of time," he murmured as we walked. "For what?" I asked. Holmes paused. Then he looked at me. "To remember Watson." The weight of his words settled between us. "Before we are forgotten, too." Chapter 9. The next day arrived with an uneasy stillness. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains of 221B Baker Street, casting long shadows over the sitting room where Holmes and I waited in silence. He sat in his chair, fingers steepled, gaze distant, the ever-present ledger resting beside him. I paced near the window, unable to shake the sensation that something just beyond the edge of my thoughts was watching. Lestrade had sent a message at dawn. Brief, clipped, "Come now." That was all. Holmes folded the note neatly, slipped it into his pocket, and rose. "Shall we, Watson?" Lestrade met us at the entrance, his expression grim. He said nothing, merely leading us through the familiar corridors of Scotland Yard until we arrived back in his office. The filing cabinet stood exactly as we had left it. The drawer marked H.L. was still open, and the blank sheet of paper Holmes had left behind was gone. Holmes said nothing at first. He approached the open drawer with the same careful attention he would give a crime scene. I could see his eyes flickering across the minute details, the way the dust had settled, the way the air itself seemed stiller around the empty space where the file should have been. Lestrade exhaled sharply. "You were right." Holmes's fingers tapped lightly against the drawer. "Not entirely. It appears they were watching too." I stepped forward. "Holmes, what does this mean?" Holmes turned to me, his expression unreadable. "It means, Watson, that someone or something recognized our attempt to remember, and that, I suspect, is why the page is no longer here." Lestrade muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. "So what now? They know we're onto them. Do we just wait for them to erase us?" Holmes exhaled slowly, his gaze flickering toward the cabinet. "We must consider what has already been erased." He glanced at Lestrade. "What do you remember of the case of Henry Acton?" Lestrade's jaw tightened. "Damn it, Holmes, I told you, I don't." Holmes's gaze sharpened, and yet... He reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a single torn page from the ledger, the one that bore our names. Lestrade stiffened as Holmes unfolded the paper and laid it on the desk. I swallowed, my pulse quickening as I glanced at the familiar names: Sherlock Holmes, John Watson, G. Lestrade. The ink was old, the paper brittle, but beneath our names, faint, as though written in fading memory, there was another name: Henry Acton. Lestrade inhaled sharply. "No, that..." His hands curled into fists. "That wasn't there before." Holmes's voice was quiet. "No, but now it is." I stepped closer, my breath unsteady. "Holmes, if his name is returning to the ledger, does that mean—" Holmes nodded. "It means he was not completely erased," Lestrade swore. "You mean we can bring him back?" Holmes glanced at me. "Perhaps." A pause, then softly he added, "Or perhaps he never left." Holmes moved quickly. Within the hour, we were in a cab, heading toward Clerkenwell, a district known for its old townhouses and narrow alleyways. Holmes gave the driver a name, Acton Street, but he said nothing more until we arrived. The street was unremarkable, lined with modest homes and small shops. It was a place where no one would expect a mystery to linger. Holmes led us to a nondescript townhouse, number 17. He turned to me. "Watson, you are a man of medical science. Tell me, if a patient were to recover from complete amnesia, what would be the first thing to return?" I frowned. "Their surroundings, perhaps. The sense of familiarity. Some emotions remain, even if names are forgotten." Holmes nodded. "Precisely." And with that, he knocked on the door. We waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. A man stood before us. Thin, pale, eyes sharp but unfocused. He was dressed in modest clothing, but his His face sent a cold shudder through me, because I knew him. I did not know how or when, but every fibre of my being recognized this man. "Mr. Acton," Holmes said smoothly. "I do apologize for the intrusion." The man frowned. His lips parted, then stopped, as though struggling to find words. His brow furrowed in deep confusion. "I don't know that name," he murmured. Lestrade stiffened beside me. "Bloody hell!" Holmes's voice remained even. "Then tell me, sir, what do you remember?" Acton's gaze flickered past us, as if seeing something beyond our presence. His fingers twitched at his sides. "I don't—" He swallowed. "It's like a dream, like I was somewhere else. But now I'm here, and I don't remember why." Holmes observed him carefully. "Do you recall anything unusual? A place? A sound?" Acton exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to his temple. "I keep hearing something." His voice turned hoarse. A whisper. Lestrade's jaw clenched. Holmes did not react. He reached into his coat, withdrawing a single object, the torn ledger page. He held it up. Acton's gaze landed on it, and his entire body shuddered. His breath hitched. "That's—" He reached for it instinctively. "That's mine." I inhaled sharply. "Holmes?" Holmes allowed him to take it. Acton's fingers trembled as they brushed the old paper. His eyes darkened. His expression changed, and then softly, "They took something from me," Lestrade whispered. "Holmes, what the hell is happening?" Holmes watched Acton with keen intensity. "He is remembering." Acton's hands tightened around the paper. His shoulders shook. His gaze turned distant. Then softly, so softly I almost did not hear it, he murmured, "They are coming." Chapter 10. The moment Henry Acton uttered those words, a profound stillness settled over the room. The air itself seemed to tense, as though holding its breath. The flickering gaslight cast sharp shadows against the walls, stretching across the modest sitting room like grasping fingers. Holmes remained poised, his keen eyes locked onto Acton's trembling form. Lestrade, on the other hand, had stiffened like a man expecting an ambush. His hand hovered near his revolver, though we all knew bullets would be meaningless against whatever force had erased Acton from existence. I swallowed hard. "Henry," I said carefully, my voice softer than I intended. "Who is coming?" Acton's breath was ragged, uneven. His fingers twitched around the torn ledger page, his gaze distant, as if he were peering through time itself. "They don't exist," he murmured. "Not in the way we think. Not men, not really. They are ideas that move." Holmes's expression did not waver, and yet they left traces, just as they did with you. Acton shuddered. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand." A faint sound, so quiet I barely registered it, drifted through the room. A sigh, not from Acton, not from Holmes, not from any of us, from the walls. Lestrade reacted instantly, stepping forward. "Holmes, we need to—" Acton's hand shot forward, grabbing Holmes by the wrist. His grip was iron. "They're already here." And then the lamps flickered. A wind that should not have existed stirred the room, though the windows were closed. The pages of the ledger flapped violently on the table. The walls groaned, not like wood expanding with age, but like something was pressing against them. Holmes did not pull away from Acton's grip. He studied him, absorbing every detail. "Tell me, Henry, how did you survive?" Acton's lips trembled. I didn't. I don't know. I just woke up, and I was here." His voice cracked. "But I shouldn't be." The whispering grew louder. This time it was not coming from one place. It was coming from everywhere. Susurrus of overlapping voices, layered atop one another, ancient and unknowable. It was neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel, just present. Then came the knock, a single soft tap at the door. Lestrade flinched. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no." Holmes turned toward the sound. He was calm, but I saw it. The brief flicker of something in his gaze. Not fear, calculation. The knock came again. Holmes stepped forward. "Watson! Lestrade! Do not move!" I swallowed hard. "Holmes, don't!" Too late. He reached for the doorknob, and the instant he touched it, the room changed. It happened in an instant, yet it stretched across eternity. One moment we were in Acton's dimly lit sitting room. The next, we were nowhere. Not darkness, not light, not shadow, not void, just absence. I blinked, expecting walls, furniture, something, anything. But the space around us had no dimension, no gravity, no up or down. Holmes stood inches from me, yet the space between us felt impossibly vast. Lestrade's form wavered, flickering as if he were caught between two realities. And Acton. Acton was standing. His expression was strange, serene almost. No longer trembling, no longer confused, the whispers surrounded us, rising and falling like the tide. Then all at once they spoke, not in sound, not in words, but directly into our minds. Sherlock Holmes. My chest tightened, my breath stopped. John Watson. My fingers curled into fists. Inspector Lestrade. Lestrade flinched. His lips parted, but no sound escaped. Then, Henry Acton. Acton shuddered violently. His eyes widened in horror. His hands clawed at his own arms, as though he could tear himself back into the world. He choked out a single broken plea. No! And then he was gone. Not faded, not dissolved. Gone. As though he had never existed. The ledger page ripped itself apart, curling inward, the ink peeling from the parchment as if it had never been written. The pieces vanished into the void. Holmes did not move. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "You fear being known." Whispers halted. A pause. Then, "You fear being remembered." Something shifted around us. Holmes exhaled slowly, turning his head ever so slightly toward me. "Watson." My throat was dry. "Yes." "You must write this down." I blinked. "Holmes, you must write this down." My hands trembled. I reached for my pocket, for my notebook, for my pen. But I had neither. They were gone. Holmes turned back to the empty space where Acton had stood. His voice was low, almost gentle. "If I solve the riddle," he murmured, "will you let us go?" Whispering began again, fainter this time, distant, as if it were retreating. The nothingness shifted once more, like ripples in a pond, and suddenly we were back. I gasped, nearly collapsing to my knees. Lestrade stumbled forward, bracing himself. against the doorframe. We were standing exactly where we had been before, the sitting room, the gas lamp flickering overhead, the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. But Acton, he was gone. Not a trace, not even his chair was warm. Lestrade's breath came ragged. "Holmes!" His voice was hoarse. "Tell me I'm not losing my mind." Holmes was staring at the empty space where Acton had sat. I followed his gaze. The torn ledger page was back on the table. But this time the ink was blank. Holmes exhaled, adjusting his cuffs. Then, without hesitation, he lifted the page, folded it neatly, and placed it inside his coat pocket. His voice was quiet. "They have let us go." Lestrade straightened, still shaken. "But Acton." Holmes glanced toward the door. "He was already gone, Lestrade." I swallowed hard. "And what about us?" Holmes turned to me. His gaze was sharp, unreadable. "We remember, and for now, that would have to be enough." Chapter 11. The air in Acton's townhouse was heavy, suffocating with the weight of what had just transpired. My pulse had yet to settle. Holmes stood at the centre of the room, still as a statue, while Lestrade exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. Acton was gone, not murdered, not missing, gone, as if he had never existed at all. The ledger page, now blank, rested on the table where Holmes had left it. A cruel reminder that something had been erased before our very eyes. Lestrade finally spoke, his voice raw. "Holmes, I need you to tell me that what just happened wasn't real." Holmes did not answer immediately. He merely adjusted his cuffs, then turned to face the inspector. "Do you remember Henry Acton Lestrade?" Lestrade opened his mouth, then stopped. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. His brow furrowed. His fingers twitched. He hesitated. Then, slowly, his eyes widened. I know that name," he murmured, as if hearing it for the first time. I know we came here. His breathing quickened. But I don't remember his face." Holmes exhaled softly. "Nor will you." Lestrade swallowed hard. His hands clenched into fists. No, that's impossible." "Knew him. His voice caught. Then his entire body tensed. I stepped forward. "Lestrade!" His breath hitched, his pupils dilated, his entire frame shuddered, then, barely above a whisper, "I can't remember your first name, Watson." Stomach dropped. I felt my own mind falter, my own memories flicker. Lestrade looked at Holmes next. His eyes widened in terror. "Holmes," he whispered. You're... He stepped back, his gaze turned distant, and then the world shuddered. It happened in a breath, yet it stretched into infinity. A violent sensation, a pulling, a distortion, a twisting of something deep in my mind. I fought to hold on to my name, to my identity, to Holmes. The whispering began again. "No, no, no!" I turned to Holmes. My voice did not work, but his did. His sharp, unwavering voice cut through the air, a blade against the creeping oblivion. "You fear being known," he murmured. "That is your weakness." The whispering halted. A pause, then, "Sherlock Holmes." The name reverberated through the air, heavy with power. and for the first time I heard them hesitate. Holmes exhaled softly. "Yes," he murmured. "You remember me now, don't you?" A shifting, a wavering, Holmes smirked. "You erased Acton," he continued. "You erased hundreds, perhaps thousands. You exist in the empty spaces between. Memory." His eyes gleamed. "But you made one mistake." The whispering hissed. Holmes took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You let me see you." A sharp crack, not sound, but something breaking. A rupture in the fabric of forgetting itself. Lestrade gasped. My mind cleared. The world shuddered, then settled, and just like that, the whispering stopped. Lestrade staggered back, panting. His face was pale, his hands shaking. Holmes turned to me. "Watson," I swallowed, steadying myself. "Yes?" His voice was low, steady. "Do you remember Henry Acton?" I opened my mouth and stopped. My mind was blank. I had just been speaking. To him, I had seen him vanish. But now, there was nothing. My chest tightened. "Holmes? What did we just do?" Holmes turned to the ledger page, still blank. A pause, then softly, "We won." But his voice carried no victory. By the time we returned to 221B Baker Street, Lestrade had grown quiet. He did not speak as we stepped inside. He did not sit. He merely stood there, as though waiting for something to be taken. Holmes set the blank page on the table. I exhaled. "So that's it, then." Holmes's gaze was unreadable. "No, Watson." He tapped the blank page. "This is not the end," I frowned. "Holmes, the ledger." Holmes turned to me sharply. "Who wrote it?" I hesitated. The realization struck like a blade. We had assumed the hollow hand had created it, that they had kept the names. But what if the ledger was not theirs? What if it was a record they could not erase? Holmes sat down slowly. He reached for his pen, and, with deliberate precision, he wrote a name. The ink stayed. He inhaled sharply. Holmes leaned back, watching the name settle onto the page as if it had always been there. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips. "We have them now, Watson." I leaned over the table and froze. There, on the blank page, was the name of a man who should not exist. Henry Acton. I looked up at Holmes. My voice was hoarse. "What does this mean?" Holmes exhaled, closing the book with a soft thud. "Means, Watson," he murmured, "that the hollow hand has just made its first mistake." He met my gaze, and I intend to make them regret it. Chapter 12a. Heavy silence filled 221B Baker Street. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting long shadows against the walls, but none of its warmth reached us. Holmes sat across from me, his fingers lightly resting atop the ledger, the book that should not exist. And yet, as I stared at the page before us, at the name that had returned, a shudder ran through me. Henry Acton. The ink was dark, unyielding, a name that had been erased from memory, from records, from the very fabric of reality, now written once more by Holmes's own hand. Lestrade had not spoken in several minutes. He sat slouched in his chair, staring at the name with hollow eyes. I suspected he was testing himself, reaching into his own memory for something, anything, that might confirm its truth. But there was nothing. Finally, I found my voice. "Holmes, what have we done?" Holmes's gaze flicked to me, his sharp, mind already 10 steps ahead. What was necessary? Lestrade exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Tell me straight, Holmes. What does this mean?" Holmes turned the ledger toward him, tapping the page. "This is their weakness, Lestrade. They have built their power on erasing what should be known. But now, for the first time, something has resisted them." I swallowed. "The ledger." Holmes nodded. "It does not belong to them. It was a tool, a record they could manipulate, but not destroy entirely." His fingers traced the page, eyes narrowing, which means if we write something here, if we remember, we create something they cannot erase. Lestrade let out a low, humourless laugh. "So that's it. We just write names and bring them back." Holmes's expression darkened. "No, we have forced them into the open. That is far more dangerous." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. "They'll retaliate." Holmes exhaled slowly. "They already have." A pause, then softly. "Listen." Lestrade stiffened. "To what?" But the moment he said it, I understood. The city outside had changed. It was not silent. No, silence would have been preferable. Instead, it was wrong. The usual sounds of London, the clatter of hooves, the distant hum of conversation, the ever-present murmur of life, were there. But wrong. It was as though we were hearing echoes of things that had already happened. A delay, a distortion. The street lamp outside flickered, but not as light should. The glow seemed to hesitate, as though time itself were uncertain of whether to move forward. Lestrade stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't like this." Holmes did not move, "Nor should you." Then a knock, soft, deliberate. We all turned toward the door. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. My hand instinctively reached for my revolver. Lestrade tensed, his fingers twitching toward his own. Holmes, however, did something unexpected. He smiled. Then, in one swift movement, he tore the ledger page from the book and tucked it into his coat. "Watson," he said smoothly. "It seems we have company." I swallowed. "Holmes!" But he was already moving toward the door. Lestrade hissed, "Don't open it!" Holmes glanced back at him. "And what do you propose we do, Inspector? Wait for them to remove us piece by piece until we no longer exist?" Lestrade clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Holmes reached for the handle, paused, then turned. The door swung open. The gas lamps in the hall flickered. The air was cold, far colder than it should have been. And standing just beyond the threshold was a man, or something that resembled one. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured beneath the brim of a wide hat. But even from where I stood, I could see his features shifting. No, not shifting, flickering, as though reality itself could not decide if he existed. Holmes remained unmoved. "Good evening." The figure said nothing at first. Then his voice emerged, smooth, measured. "You have done something you should not have." Holmes's lips quirked. "That depends on whom you ask." The man tilted his head slightly. "There are things not meant to be remembered." Holmes exhaled. "And yet, here we are." A pause. The man's voice remained calm, almost conversational. believe you are clever, Mr. Holmes." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "No, sir, I know I am." A long silence. Then the figure took a step forward. Instinctively, Lestrade raised his revolver. Not another step. The man ignored him. His gaze remained fixed on Holmes. "You do not understand what you are interfering with." Holmes chuckled. "Ah, but that is where you are mistaken." He reached into his coat and withdrew the torn page. The moment it was revealed, the gas lamps flickered violently. The air tightened. The shadows stretched. The man in the doorway twitched, just slightly, but I saw it. Holmes held the paper between two fingers, tilting it toward the light. "I wonder," he mused, "if you could erase Henry Acton before, can you do so now?" The figure did not move. Holmes's smile sharpened. "You can't, can you?" A long pause. Then, for the first time, I saw something flicker across the figure's shifting face. Not anger. Fear. Holmes's voice softened, almost gentle. "You've lost control." Another pause. Then the man in the doorway spoke, his voice lower now, quieter. "You do not know what you have done." Holmes inclined his head. Perhaps. Then the man stepped back into the darkness, and without another word, he vanished. The door swung shut behind him. The lamps stabilized. The air settled. And just like that, he was gone. Holmes stood in silence for several moments. Then, slowly, he folded the torn page and placed it inside the ledger. Lestrade collapsed back into his chair. "Holmes!" His voice was strained. What just happened? Holmes dusted off his coat. "A negotiation of sorts," I swallowed. "And did we win?" Holmes's expression was unreadable. "For now," Lestrade exhaled. "And what now?" Holmes turned toward the fireplace, gazing into the flickering embers. "Now," he murmured, "we wait." "For what?" I asked. Holmes's fingers brushed over the ledger's cover. His voice was barely above a whisper. For them to make their next move. And somehow, deep in my bones, I knew the hollow hand was not finished with us. Chapter 13. The embers in the fireplace had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls of 221B Baker Street. The tension in the room had not dissipated, not entirely. Even after the figure had vanished, after the unnatural quiet outside had begun to settle into something resembling normality, the air felt thick, weighted. Lestrade sat motionless, his fingers still curled around the arm of his chair. His breathing had steadied, but I could see the haunted look in his eyes, the unspoken question lingering at the edge of his mind. Holmes stood by the mantel, his gaze fixed on the ledger, fingers tapping lightly against its cover. It had been minutes since the strange visitor had departed, minutes since Holmes had forced them to retreat, and yet the silence between us remained unbroken. Finally, Lestrade spoke, his voice hoarse. "Holmes?" Holmes did not look at him. Lestrade swallowed. Tell me that we haven't just signed our own damnation." Holmes exhaled softly. "If they could erase us, Inspector," he murmured, "they would have done so already." Lestrade let out a bitter chuckle. "That's not exactly comforting." I folded my hands together, choosing my words carefully. "They fear the ledger." Holmes nodded. "More precisely, they fear what it represents." He turned to us now, his gaze sharp, calculating. A record they cannot erase, a flaw in their otherwise perfect control over history. Lestrade ran a hand through his hair. And what now? What's stopping them from trying again? Holmes lifted the ledger and flipped it open. I leaned forward instinctively. The torn page, the one bearing Henry Acton's name, was still there. The ink had not faded. He had not been forgotten, but something had changed. I frowned. Holmes, look, at the bottom of the page. Holmes followed my gaze. Beneath Henry Acton's name, where there had once been nothing, a new name had appeared, Sherlock Holmes. I stiffened. My mouth went dry. Holmes stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Lestrade shot to his feet. Holmes, what does that mean? Holmes exhaled. It means, he said quietly, that they have made their next move. I swallowed hard. Holmes, if your name is in the ledger, then I have become a problem they must correct. Silence stretched between us. Lestrade's jaw clenched. Then we burn the damn thing. Holmes tilted his head slightly. No, Lestrade. His voice was even, measured. If we destroy it, we destroy our only proof that they exist. We must use it, Lestrade scoffed. Use it. Holmes, they've marked you for erasure, yes. Holmes interrupted smoothly, which means we have very little time to act. He sat down, resting the ledger on his knee. They will attempt to isolate me, to unravel my presence in the world. We must move before they succeed. Lestrade shook his head. And how the hell do we stop something we barely understand? Holmes's lips curved slightly. By reminding them that I exist. We worked quickly. Holmes dictated and I wrote every detail, every deduction, the entire case, from the moment Lestrade had brought us news of Elias Finchley's disappearance to the chilling confrontation at Acton's townhouse. The ink dried on the pages of my journal, an anchor against oblivion. Lestrade left shortly after, his expression grim but determined. He would ensure that Scotland Yard recorded every detail, that Holmes's name would be spoken, repeated, embedded into history. Holmes was marking himself in time. He would not be erased. But as the night deepened, a strange exhaustion settled over me. Not the fatigue of sleeplessness, but something else. A dull ache in my mind, a fog at the edges of my thoughts. Holmes noticed Watson. His voice was quiet. What do you remember about our first case together? I blinked, taken aback. What? Our first case, Watson, he repeated. Describe it to me. I hesitated. I knew the answer, and yet the details slipped through my grasp, like sand through my fingers. A sense of unease coiled in my gut. Holmes nodded slightly. So, it begins. I clenched my fists. Holmes, what's happening? Expression darkened. They are undoing me, piece by piece. My breath hitched. Then we need to... Before I could finish my thought, the gas lamps flickered. Holmes straightened, his sharp gaze snapping to the door. A single deliberate knock echoed through the flat. Not like before. Not a visitor. A warning. Holmes exhaled softly. Watson, I swallowed. Yes, his voice was quieter now. Steady. If something happens to me, he murmured, you must remember. My stomach twisted. Holmes? The lamps went out, the room plunged into darkness, and a voice, impossibly close, whispered, "Sherlock Holmes is gone." I lunged forward instinctively, but the space where Holmes had been was empty. The chair was still warm. His coat still rested over its arm. But he was gone. A sharp, piercing pressure filled my head, as if my own mind were resisting the truth. No, 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 this wasn't happening. I pressed my hands against my temples, forcing my thoughts into order. He was here. He had just spoken to me. I knew Sherlock Holmes. I knew his mind, his voice, his impossible brilliance. They could not take him. I staggered toward the table, grasping the ledger. My fingers trembled as I flipped open the page, and I froze. His name had vanished. The ink had faded, leaving only an empty space where he had been. A deep, gut-wrenching dread coiled in my chest. They had taken him, and if I let go, if I allowed myself to forget, they would win. I grabbed my pen. I pressed it against the page. My hand shook, but I forced myself to write. Sherlock Holmes exists. The ink bled into the page. The moment I finished the sentence, the gas lamps flared back to life. And the voice, the whispering presence that had filled the room, it screamed. A horrible, twisting wail that reverberated through my bones. And then, silence. A deep, aching silence. I lifted my gaze. Holmes was back. He sat in his chair, fingers steepled as if he had never left. His eyes met mine. "Well done, Watson," I gasped for breath. "Holmes!" He leaned forward. "They cannot erase what is written." A slow smile touched his lips. "This war," he murmured, "has only just begun." Chapter 14. Sherlock Holmes sat across from me, fingers steepled, beneath his chin, his sharp gaze unwavering. The flickering gaslight played across his face, casting long shadows against the walls of 221B Baker Street. Moments ago, he had been gone. Erased. Now, he was here. I had brought him back. The weight of my own handwriting burned into my mind. Sherlock Holmes exists. I could still hear the whispering scream of the hollow hand fading into the void. I could still feel the tension in the air, the pressure of reality itself snapping back into place. Holmes was alive because of words on a page. I swallowed hard. Holmes? He tilted his head slightly, waiting. My throat was dry. What just happened? His expression did not change. They failed. I exhaled shakily. Failed to do what? Holmes leaned forward. To erase me, and more importantly. He tapped the ledger, still open on the table. They failed to erase the truth. Lestrade entered at that moment, his face pale, his breath unsteady. He had been in the corridor outside, likely stealing himself before re-entering the fray. His eyes locked onto Holmes. He froze. I thought... Lestrade's voice broke. "Holmes, I thought you were..." Holmes's lips curled ever so slightly. A convenient illusion, I'm sure. Lestrade ran a hand over his face. "Damn it, Holmes. I saw you vanish. We all did." Holmes lifted the ledger page between two fingers. "And yet I am here." A pause. Then quietly he added, "Because Watson refused to let me go." Lestrade turned to me, his brows drawn together. I gave a small, hesitant nod. Lestrade exhaled. "You're telling me..." He gestured vaguely at the air, as if trying to pull the explanation from thin air. That they can't erase something if we remember it. Holmes set the ledger down. No, not just remember. His gaze flickered toward me. It must be recorded, fixed in the real world, spoken, written. I swallowed. That's why they fear the ledger. Holmes nodded, and why they came for me the moment my name appeared within it. Lestrade scoffed, rubbing his temples. So what? We just keep writing names down. That's the plan. Holmes tilted his head slightly. Not quite. Lestrade narrowed his eyes. Then what is? Holmes exhaled softly, then slowly turned the ledger to a blank page. He took up his pen, rolled it between his fingers. Then, with careful precision, he began to write. Lestrade leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The name Henry Acton reappeared on the parchment. I held my breath. Holmes did not stop. His hand moved with unwavering determination. Another name, Elias Finchley. Lestrade stiffened. Holmes! Another name, Margaret Locksley. A ripple seemed to pass through the room, as though the very air had turned taut. The flickering of the lamps wavered for just a moment. Holmes's voice was low, steady. We are no longer playing their game, Lestrade. His pen scratched across the paper once more. The names of the forgotten will return. Lestrade exhaled. Holmes, you're picking a fight. Holmes leaned back, closing the ledger with a soft thud. A small, knowing smile. Yes, he murmured, I am. 3 nights later, we found Henry Acton's house. It should not have been there. Yet it was, standing once more on Burlington Place, exactly where it had disappeared. The empty alleyway between number 41 and number 45 was no longer empty. A house, place that should not be. Lestrade stood at my side, staring up at it. That was, he swallowed, that was just an alleyway, Holmes. Holmes adjusted his coat. It was. Now, it is a house. I stepped forward. The street felt wrong. There was no sound of carriages, no passing pedestrians, no signs of life. Only the house. Holmes strode forward and knocked. The sound echoed. The door swung open, by itself. Holmes turned to us. His voice was quiet. Shall we? Lestrade groaned. This is going to be the death of me. And together we stepped inside. The air inside the house was thick, heavy with a presence we could not see. The walls looked new, untouched by time, as if the house had been built yesterday. Yet, at the same time, dust coated the furniture, the bookshelves, the staircase leading to the upper floors. It was both ancient and newborn. We moved cautiously, our footsteps swallowed by the silence. Holmes, ever unshaken, observed every detail. His fingers ran over the wooden rail of the staircase, his sharp eyes noting things I could not see. Then, a voice, not a whisper this time, not from the walls, from the darkness beyond the hall. You cannot win. Lestrade drew his revolver. Oh, hell no. Holmes remained still. On the contrary, he murmured, you've already lost. A long pause, then the voice, flat, hollow. You do not understand what you are doing. Holmes exhaled. Then enlighten me. A slow shift in the air. We do not erase for cruelty, Sherlock Holmes. Holmes said nothing. We erase to protect. A chill ran down my spine. From what? A pause. Then the past. Holmes inhaled sharply. Lestrade scoffed. Oh, brilliant! That explains nothing. The voice did not respond. Holmes's expression was unreadable. Then, in a measured tone, he said, You are afraid. A subtle change in the air. Holmes continued, You fear what will happen when the lost are remembered. No answer. Holmes smirked. Then we are at an impasse. A deep, rumbling shift, then leave. The walls shuddered. The room around us dimmed. Lestrade swore. Time to go. Holmes did not argue. We turned, rushed for the door, and as we stepped out into the London night, the house behind us vanished. Holmes and I sat in our study that evening, the ledger between us. He turned to me. Watson. I exhaled. Yes, his voice was quiet. Write it all down. I nodded, dipping my pen into ink. The story must be told. Holmes leaned back. It is not over. I looked up. They will try again. Holmes smirked. Oh, undoubtedly. A pause, then softly he added, But now, Watson, we are no longer merely solving the mystery. He exhaled. We are rewriting history. I placed the pen to paper and began to write. Chapter 15. The weight of the night settled over 221B Baker Street, thick with unspoken tension. I sat at my desk, pen poised over my journal, recounting every moment of our latest case. Holmes had been watching me in silence, not out of impatience, but something else. Calculation. He had won a battle against the hollow hand, but neither of us was foolish enough to believe this was the end. The enemy had withdrawn, but they had not disappeared. Not entirely. I finished the final line of my account and set my pen down. My fingers ached, my mind clouded by exhaustion. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Holmes spoke, his voice breaking the hush. Watson. I turned to him. He gestured to the ledger, which lay closed, on the table. Open it! A cold shudder ran through me. I hesitated. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Do not fear what is written, Watson. Fear what is missing. I swallowed and reached for the book. Slowly, carefully, I flipped it open. For a long moment, nothing seemed amiss. Henry Acton's name remained where Holmes had written it. Elias Finchley, Margaret Loxley. The names had stayed, but there, on the very last page, was something new. A name that neither Holmes nor I had written. Arthur Wellesley. I stiffened. My breath caught in my throat. Lestrade leaned forward, frowning. Who the hell is Arthur Wellesley? Holmes's expression remained unreadable. The Duke of Wellington. Lestrade's brow furrowed. The same Duke of Wellington? The one who defeated Napoleon? Holmes inclined his head. I licked my lips. But he's been dead for years, Holmes. Holmes drummed his fingers against the table. Yes, and yet someone wishes to erase him. The room fell into a weighted silence. Lestrade scoffed. This is madness, are you telling me they're trying to wipe out one of the most famous men in British history? Holmes exhaled. Not just famous, Lestrade. Crucial. His eyes darkened. If the Duke of Wellington is erased, then history itself will begin to unravel. I swallowed hard. Holmes, if they succeed... He gave a slight nod. Then Napoleon wins. A chill spread through me. Lestrade let out a low curse. I don't believe this. Holmes leaned back. The hollow hand claimed they erased to protect. But from what? His gaze flickered to the name in the ledger. Perhaps now we shall see. The following morning, Holmes wasted no time. Travelled across London, following one simple question. Had anyone spoken of the Duke of Wellington in recent weeks? The result was unsettling. Most people recalled his name, for now, but something was wrong. The details of his battles were vague. His role at Waterloo was diminished. A historian at the British Museum, a man Holmes had spoken with before, blinked at us in confusion. Wellington? He commanded, yes, but he was not the primary strategist. That was... The man hesitated. His expression turned blank. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Go on. The historian rubbed his temples. Strange. I could have sworn there was another name. Lestrade swore under his breath. Holmes, this is happening in real time. Holmes's fingers twitched at his side. Yes, I clenched my fists. They're already changing things. Holmes turned sharply. We need to find the last written account of Wellington's life. Before it's too late. Our search led us to the Royal Archives, where the most definitive account of Wellington's life was kept. If the hollow hand sought to erase him, then surely this would be their next target. But as we arrived, I saw the truth in the eyes of the archivist, his confusion, his hesitation. I felt my stomach drop. The Duke of Wellington, he murmured. His voice was uncertain. We do not have such a record. Holmes's jaw clenched. You did? The man frowned, shaking his head. No, sir, there has never been such a volume. Lestrade cursed. Damn it, Holmes. Holmes exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening at his sides. We are already too late. I ran a hand through my hair. Then, how do we stop them? Holmes turned to me. His gaze was sharp, determined. We do what we did before. My breath caught. You mean? Holmes nodded once. We write him back into history. That night, Holmes sat at his desk, the ledger open before him. A fresh sheet of paper lay beneath his hands, and he began to write every detail, every battle, the Iron Duke's triumphs, his mistakes, his very existence, woven back into ink. Lestrade watched, arms crossed, his expression grim. You think this will work? Holmes did not stop writing. It already has. I clenched my fists. But they won't stop Holmes. If they're rewriting history itself, then... Holmes lifted his pen. His eyes met mine. That is precisely why we must fight back. He exhaled. They are undoing history, Watson. A pause. He set down his pen. But we shall be its defenders. I inhaled sharply. Lestrade turned away, exhaling heavily. And at that moment I realized we had passed the point of no return. This was no longer a case. This was a war. And Holmes had just declared himself its general. Chapter 16. The dim glow of the gas lamps barely penetrated the heavy fog that coiled around 221B Baker Street. The ledger lay open on the table, its pages filled with names Holmes had forced back into existence. Yet, as I watched, the ink shifted, not fading, changing. The name Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, had been restored. But now, beneath it, a new name had begun to appear, not written by Holmes, not written by me. It was writing itself. Holmes leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Watson," I swallowed. "I see it." Lestrade muttered a curse. "Tell me that isn't them." Holmes exhaled slowly. "It is." The ink darkened, forming crisp letters on the page. Sherlock Holmes. A chill settled over me. Lestrade stiffened. "Holmes, what the hell does that mean?" Holmes stared at the name for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smirked. "It means, Lestrade," he murmured, "that they have finally acknowledged me as a threat." Lestrade ran a hand through his hair. "Great. And what happens now?" Holmes turned the ledger toward me. "We prepare." I frowned. "For what?" Holmes's gaze met mine. The hollow hand's final move. That night, London changed, not all at once, not in some catastrophic collapse, but subtly, wrongly. Lestrade had gone to Scotland Yard, ensuring the city's records remained intact. Holmes and I followed up at the British Museum, where the archivists had grown increasingly disoriented. "They're forgetting," I murmured as we stepped into the library's vast halls. Holmes nodded. "Yes, but not naturally." We approached. One of the head archivists, a man Holmes had consulted in many cases. Mr. Hargreaves, an intelligent, well-spoken man, stood near a massive oak desk, rubbing his temples. Holmes cleared his throat. "Mr. Hargreaves." The archivist looked up, his eyes vacant. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, forgive me, His brow furrowed. "I seem to have forgotten something important." Holmes's voice remained calm. "The Duke of Wellington." The man blinked. "The Duke of—" He hesitated, as though the name were slipping from his grasp. Then, to my horror, he smiled. "Oh, you mean Napoleon, of course." My stomach plummeted. I stepped forward. "No, Mr. Hargreaves, Arthur Wellesley, the man who defeated Napoleon at Waterloo." The archivist laughed. "Defeated?" He shook his head. "No, my good man, that's not right. Napoleon won. His voice hitched. His hands trembled. Holmes remained motionless, his sharp gaze locked onto the man. "When did it change, Mr. Hargreaves?" The archivist pressed his fingers to his temples. I don't know. Just now." His breath came faster. "I knew something else a moment ago. I knew it." Holmes turned to me. "Watson." I nodded. "They've begun rewriting." Lestrade entered the library at that moment, his expression grim. "Holmes, you need to see this." We followed him outside. The streets of London were wrong. Shops were different, names altered, buildings reshaped, landmarks blurred at the edges of memory, as if uncertain whether they should exist. Lestrade exhaled sharply. "People are changing history as they speak. My officers can't remember what laws were passed last year." He turned to Holmes. "Tell me you have a plan." Holmes studied the shifting cityscape, his mind working faster than ever. Then, softly, "We go to the source." At midnight we returned to Acton's townhouse, or rather, to the empty space where it had once stood. But, as we approached, a sensation of wrongness spread over me. Holmes did not hesitate. "They are here." The air rippled. The hollow hand did not arrive with footsteps. They unfolded from the shadows, shaping themselves from the absence of light. Holmes stepped forward. "You are losing!" The voices did not whisper this time. They spoke. "You have seen too much, Sherlock Holmes." Holmes smirked. "And yet I remain." A pause, then softly. "You interfere with what must be." Holmes tilted his head. "Must be, or what you have decided it should be." The voices did not answer. Holmes exhaled. "You claim to erase for protection. So tell me, what do you fear?" The figures flickered. Holmes pressed on. "What happens if history is remembered as it was? What happens if Wellington's name remains? If Acton's name remains? If—" He smiled. "If I remain." The air tightened. I felt the pressure in my skull, like something was trying to pry into my thoughts, rewrite them, undo them. But Holmes did not falter. He reached into his coat and threw the ledger onto the ground. The hollow hand recoiled. Holmes's voice was low, steady. "This is your weakness." The shadows quivered. Holmes took a slow step forward. "Erase me again. I will return." Another step. "Erase history again. I will restore it." The voices hissed. "You cannot stop us." Holmes exhaled. "But I can make you fight for every name." A long, terrible silence. Then the hollow hand retreated, not defeated, not destroyed, but they had lost. For now. Holmes sat in his chair, the firelight playing across his face. He did not look tired. He never did. I sat across from him. The ledger closed between us. Lestrade had left, ensuring that the names were spoken, recorded, re-cemented into reality. For now, London was safe. I exhaled. "Will they return?" Holmes smirked. "Of course," ran a hand through my hair. "And what do we do when they do?" Holmes leaned forward. "We do what we always do, Watson." He tapped the ledger. "We remember." I picked up my pen and began to write. Chapter 17. The streets of London seemed unchanged in the days that followed, yet there was an undeniable tension in the air. It was the kind of stillness that settled after a storm, not of relief, but of anticipation. Holmes, as always, did not let the quiet lull him into complacency. I found him at his usual post near the fireplace of 221B Baker Street, the ledger open before him, a fresh page untouched beneath his fingers. The hollow hand had withdrawn. For now, yet neither of us believed they had been truly defeated. Lestrade had been unusually silent since the confrontation. When I saw him at Scotland Yard, he appeared restless, checking old records, speaking in clipped tones to his officers. The ordeal had shaken him more than he cared to admit. And me? I could not shake the feeling that something had been left unfinished. Exhaled, setting my teacup down. "Holmes, you've hardly spoken since the incident. What are you thinking?" He didn't look up. "That they will return." I swallowed. "But why? You've already proven that we can fight back, that they can't erase what is written." Holmes' gaze finally met mine. "That is precisely why they will return, Watson." He tapped the ledger. "Because we are no longer merely observers in this battle. We are players." A chill ran down my spine. Lestrade entered the sitting-room at that moment, his coat dusted from the evening air. He threw himself into the chair opposite us and exhaled. "I hate to say this," he muttered. "But I think you're right, Holmes." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "That must have been painful for you to admit, Inspector." Lestrade shot him a glare. "I'm serious." He leaned forward. "Something isn't right." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Lestrade hesitated. "The Yard's records. They're changing." Holmes stiffened. "Go on." Lestrade rubbed his forehead. "It's subtle, not as drastic as before, but I can feel it happening. Cases I know we solved have been altered. The names remain, but the outcomes—" He shook his head. "It's like they're being rewritten." I turned to Holmes. "I thought you said we stopped them." Holmes's fingers tapped the armrest of his chair. "No, Watson, we delayed them." A long silence settled between us. Then Holmes reached for his pen, and with deliberate precision he wrote a single line in the ledger. "What has been erased cannot be undone." We inhaled sharply. "Holmes!" He exhaled. "It is a warning, Watson." Lestrade tensed. "A warning to whom?" Holmes's lips curled slightly. "To them." And in that moment, as the ink settled onto the page, the room around us shifted. The gas lamps flickered, the air tightened, and then a single word appeared in the ledger, beneath Holmes' handwriting. No, a simple, sharp response. I felt my blood run cold. "Holmes!" Holmes leaned forward, studying the word as though it were a puzzle waiting to be solved. Lestrade stood abruptly. "I don't like this." Holmes smirked. "That makes 3 of us." Then softly, so softly I almost missed it, a whisper. Not from the room, not from the walls, from the ledger itself. Holmes exhaled slowly, closing the book. "Well," he murmured, "it seems we are expected." Lestrade let out a curse. "Expected for what?" Holmes stood adjusting his coat. "For the next game." I clenched my fists. "Holmes, tell me the truth. Can we win?" Holmes turned to me, his gaze unreadable. Answer was not reassuring, only if we refused to be forgotten. And with that, he strode toward the door. The war was far from over, and we had only just begun to fight. Chapter 18. The gaslight flickered over 221B Baker Street, casting long, uneasy shadows along the walls. The ledger remained closed on the table, its presence a silent reminder of the battle that had not yet ended. I sat in my chair, my pen resting idly against the pages of my journal. The hollow hand had been driven back, for now, but their message, their final word in the ledger, still lingered in my mind. No, a rejection, a warning, a promise. Holmes stood near the window, his sharp gaze fixed on the fog-laden streets below. For once he did not speak. He merely watched. I exhaled. "Holmes, do you think they'll try again?" He did not turn. "Of course." A long silence. Then, softly, he continued. "They do not act from malice, Watson. They do not erase for power, nor for cruelty. They erase to preserve." I frowned. "Preserve what?" Holmes turned now, his expression unreadable. "A history they believe should not be known." I shifted in my seat. "But why? What purpose does it serve?" Holmes stepped forward, resting a hand on the ledger. "That is the question, Watson. What are they hiding? What should not be remembered?" Swallowed hard. "Do you think we'll find out?" Holmes exhaled, glancing down at the ledger. And then, slowly, deliberately, he opened it. A single line had appeared beneath the last entry, one that neither of us had written. "Not everything should be saved, Mr. Holmes." I stiffened. There, still watching. Holmes smiled, not in amusement, not in victory, but in understanding. "They always were, Watson." A pause. Then Holmes picked up his pen, and beneath their final warning, beneath their last attempt to silence him, he wrote one final reply. Neither should everything be forgotten. The ink settled into the page. The lamps did not flicker. The shadows did not shift. The whispers did not come. The hollow hand did not respond. Not this time. Holmes closed the ledger with a soft thud, and for the first time since this case had begun, since we had first uncovered the impossible truth, he laughed. Not out of relief, but because in this battle, in this great war of memory and erasure, he had won. For now. Holmes turned to me. "Come, Watson, I believe Lestrade owes me a bottle of brandy." I stood, shaking my head with a smile. "Another wager?" Holmes smirked. "It is only gambling if there is doubt." I followed him to the door, glancing once more at the ledger, at the names we had restored, at the truths we had fought to preserve. And as we stepped out into the London night, I knew, somewhere, the hollow hand was watching. But so was Sherlock Holmes, and as long as he remained, as long as he refused to be erased, history would be safe, for now.